Hello guys, welcome back to another video. This is S'mores IDV to show you my COA9 predictions for this group stage. Now, I actually already did this on stream before, but I have made some changes, especially with more recent information coming out about the teams and the rosters. So this will be slightly different. It is mostly the same from the stream, so I will also link the stream down below. But with no further ado, let's get right on with it with Group A. Now, I will be making two different predictions. The first one is what I think is the most realistic outcome. And when I say most realistic, it's just the outcome that I think is most likely to happen. It is what we expect to happen. And then there's my predictions, which has some upsets happening in the tournament, and that really just accounts for the fact that the tournaments never follow the consensus winners. They never follow the consensus plan. They are always unpredictable. So I'll start first with the team I put at 5th place in the realistic predictions, which is none other than AR. Now, AR is a good team. Their hunter Hessian is one of the best hunters in the game. Yuki has been a long-standing player. PP has competed in COA8, and this team is pretty good. Meow Pai is also on Survivor, and he's significantly improved from his IVT run. The issue, however, is that their survivors still feel inconsistent. Their plans feel rather rigid and almost predictable in the first round, which we see GH Momoka absolutely capitalize with his QS. And I just feel like AR right now, especially after that loss against Momoka, I do think that their survivors are a bit questionable, especially when you're going against Weibo Gaming and DFM, which all have strong QS, and TRC, not sure if RC has it, but TE does have it in later rounds, and RC, well, RC would probably have it anyways. AR is kind of at this position where it's really tough for them to win a first round as a survivor team, especially if they have QS, because their composition is always weak towards it. And this kind of gives this issue where even though they have a hunter that could be MVP level, their survivors are always the ones kind of, being the question mark for this team. Still a good team though, but in a group like Group A, where you do have to face a bunch of professional teams, AR isn't really going to have a chance to win against any of them. So I decided to put them at 5th place. At 4th place is DFM. Now, DFM is my favorite team, so it's really hard to put them at 4th place. But they recently announced that Takoyaki will not be playing in the COA group stages due to some academic requirements. And this is kind of an issue because DFM had Takoyaki as their main rescuer. Now it's going to be Riz, and at least to my understanding, Riz wasn't really a rescuer main during their time as a starter in DFM. So this kind of puts them in a position where they don't have one of their best players. This still doesn't take away the fact though that they have one of the stronger hunter rosters within the region, and they also have a pretty solid survivor team even without Takoyaki. Still though, in a matchup where they're facing against one of the best Japanese team, a TE team that qualified quite quickly, and well, Weibo Gaming, I do think that they do have a chance to not qualify, and so I will be putting them at 4th place. At 3rd place is Weibo Gaming. Now this is a team I don't really want to be putting this high, but especially with the circumstances of DFM, it feels almost disrespectful to not put Weibo Gaming at 3rd, because this team does have the potential to be good. We already know how good their survivor roster can be. That is something that we saw during the summer season, where they ended up being the runner-ups in the IVL summer finals. And so we know that Weibo Gaming can be a good team. The issue, it almost feels like, is just the flexibility of the survivors. They're still kind of getting the hang of Archer on Walker. They're still having to adjust on their rescuers. And not only that, but Nyanya being a solar hunter has constantly put him in situations of pressure where Nyanya almost feels the need to win every time, and it always causes in a collapse from him. Weibo Gaming is just a team that's really inconsistent, but with the changes to DFM and then the other team being AR from Southeast Asia, Weibo Gaming does have a pretty solid path to 3rd place, and so I will be putting them in 3rd place. Now, in 2nd place is going to be TE, one of the first teams to qualify through the Chinese qualifiers. And TE is a pretty solid team. They almost beat GR in their stint to the qualification, and they are just pretty solid. Even after losing their sub hunter, PP has been pretty solid. The survivors have been pretty solid. It's a solid team. I really don't have anything else to say about TE because, frankly, I mean, they're a good team. They just are. Are they a championship winning team? I don't think so, but they're a pretty good team that would probably not mess up against the other teams that are in Group A. And so I'm going to be putting them at second place for this exact reason. TE is just solid, unlike the other three teams here, which has question marks about their consistency. Now we are going to go to the first place team, and of course it's RC. Now Rowley isn't going to be playing for RC, which is a big blow, but I feel like people over exaggerate it. They still have the hunter core of Aka and Alf, and Aka just being the best hunter from Japan, quite literally. And then you still have Unp in this team, you still have the survivor core pretty intact. Fuku has been playing with this team and has been practicing with RC. It seems as if they were prepared for the scenario in which Rowley may not be able to attend due to health issues. And so I just feel like RC just has a lot of things going on for them, even though they don't have Rowley. Plus, the lack of preparation from other teams because they didn't have to go through qualifiers just makes it a much more difficult time to prep against them. So RC, I feel, is in a pretty advantageous spot, especially in a group that has a lot of inconsistent teams. And so I'm going to put them at first place. Now, that is the realistic predictions, but my predictions say otherwise. I did still put DFM at third just because I think that the hunter core of MZK and Yami is genuinely goated. After all, MZK is my favorite player. But a more realistic discussion about it, DFM Hunters are going to absolutely decimate Weibo Gaming with the way they are playing. The thing is that Gawker's harass is so inconsistent, but that harass is the same thing that it takes to beat DFM, especially MZK, who round 1 peddlers when the composition fits. This just really puts Weibo Gaming in a position where it almost feels like they almost need to always have a harasser in most of their rounds. But the issue is, since that harass is so inconsistent, it could cause them actually more losses than wins. And so I decided to put Weibo Gaming at 4th and DFM at 3rd, even without Takoyaki in the team. Besides, Weibo Gaming doesn't really have a lot of camp hunters to really punish DFM not having a rescuer. And this kind of means that the issue, or rather the concern of Takoyaki not being in a DFM roster isn't too big of a deal, especially if DFM had already been practicing this during the lead up to the global stages. So I did put DFM still at 3rd and Weibo Gaming at 4th, which was my original predictions before they announced Takoyaki was actually not going to play for this team. This now leads me though to Group B. And Group B is a lot more interesting because it is one of the groups that a lot of teams significantly struggle at predicting. And so I'll start first with what I think is the first team, or the most realistic team to play first, which is Wolves. Wolves is just a really consistent team. Even though they did lose 4-7, even though there are a lot of dramas, Wolves still has a pretty solid core. Weather has really stepped up for this team, and well, there's just a lot of things that are promising about this team. They don't really have a big hole or a big issue in their team. They don't have something that can be exploited by other teams, and I feel like this is kind of the main thing that makes Wolves such a good team. It just feels as if that even though with all those controversies, this team remains to be solid. Unlike all the other teams in Group B, they're a lot more consistent than the rest. So I just feel like Wolves, even with losing 4-7, even with all the controversy over the past few months, is still a really, really solid team. So I'm going to put them at first. At second is GR, which is the favorite to actually win Group B. The issue isn't the fact that Jin isn't already the greatest hunter of all time, but the fact that their survivors are just not consistent enough. Zero has been probably one of the worst pickups so far we've seen, and he has been inconsistent, with GR almost losing to GW during their qualifiers. GW didn't even qualify for COA in the end. It really tells you a lot about how inconsistent GR is as a team. And even though Jin is the greatest hunter right now, the issue isn't the fact that Jin isn't enough, but the fact that survivors are just too weak. And so I feel like putting them at second is a much more realistic case because Wolves is just going to be a much more consistent team. At third place is going to be Axis Wave. Axis Wave is a pretty solid team. They have a pretty solid hunter core. They have a pretty solid survivor core, except the fact that Tuna is not in their survivor roster, and instead it is on Mono P. and this kind of makes an issue where the survivors are a whole lot more inconsistent than they normally would be. Axis is a good team, don't get me wrong, but especially if you're going to be facing someone like the best hunter of all time, and you're also facing a consistent team like Wolves, I don't see how Axis is really going to be winning against those matchups. It would require MVP level performances from Kakuri and Kakaha, which to be fair is very possible, but I think is unlikely. So I'm going to be putting Axis at third place. At fourth is a team I do not like. It is GG. GG is one of the last teams, and in fact actually is the last team to qualify in probably one of the goofiest ways possible. GG really shouldn't be here, but still this is GG we're talking about, and I feel like they can still place above X team because X team kind of qualified very abnormally as well. GG is a pretty okay team. I think the main issue with GG isn't really the fact that, you know, Xiaoma and like other players are just playing in a poor level, but the fact that it almost feels like Buhuo, their coach, has absolutely no clue about the meta and has absolutely no clue how to manage a team. It just feels confusing why they're running 5-man rosters, why they're letting Chu just play round 1 when he's literally a way better hunter right now than Xiaoma. This team has the potential and the machinations to be a good team. They just have absolutely no clue how to do that. And that's why GG is at fourth, because I still think they're going to beat X team, but they run the same strats and they're probably going to lose to all the other teams. And finally is X team. I don't really have a lot of things to say about X team. I'm more surprised that this team also qualified. X team is a pretty okay team. Like, they're pretty there. They qualified as one of the last teams, one of the last few teams to qualify in the Call of the Abyss group stages, but it just feels as if this team isn't that good. Their hunter is pretty solid, but their survivors almost feel very inconsistent. Actually, scratch that. This entire team feels inconsistent. I just don't know where to put X team, and it feels like among all the things that I don't know, it might just be safer to put them at fifth. Which now leads to my actual predictions. As I mentioned, those are the realistic predictions, but in terms of my predictions, I actually put GR at first. I just feel like Jin is too good of a hunter, and that a lot of people that dislike Zero doesn't really recognize that Zero probably won't have a lot of chances to throw in a meta where you still have 18-second Hala, in a meta where there is no Queen Bee, in a team or in a group where the peddlers are either absolutely cheeks or just doesn't exist at all, with the exception of Axis. I just feel like GR really isn't gonna be losing. The only way I see GR not placing first, or maybe even placing as low as third or fourth, is if both GG, Axis, and Wolves all decide to play Bonbon collectively, which could happen, but at that point it would absolutely be insane, because that meant that GR had actually lost the first two rounds, or just tied the first two rounds, which really begs the question whether it's an issue on Bonbon or whether it's an issue on GR in general. I feel like despite the inconsistency of their survivor, Jin is just at a whole other level, and I feel like Wolves, GG, and Axis' survivors are just not going to be enough to beat them, especially with the changes they're in. Another thing is the fact that ever since Wolves lost 487, the Harasser rule has been kind of weak from Wolves. Basically, Harasser is now, I believe, on Jelly or Tian, and I just feel like this really makes them a lot more inflexible as a team. I just don't know if Wolves has the survivor roster necessary to actually beat Jin if they were ever in a condition where the survivors actually had to win. And I just feel like that's going to be the main thing that causes GR to get to the finish line. GR survivors could probably tie much more consistently than the other teams because, well, Jin is just that guy. So I'm going to put GR at first. Wolves is at second because they're still the most consistent team ever, but I just put them below GR because, as I've previously mentioned, I think GR Jin is just that guy. Axis is still at third, and now I put X Team at fourth and GG at fifth, simply because, well, I don't like GG. That's pretty much it. So now we're going to be going on to Group C. And for Group C, I will be putting ACT first. ACT was the first team in the Chinese qualifiers to qualify, and in surprising fashion too, as they beat Weibo Gaming 2-0 in that way. ACT feels like the team that always locks in whenever COA qualifiers comes, but then when the COA group stages happen, they typically place third. Still though, this team feels very solid. The survivors look a lot better. COA9 is absolutely cooking as a hunter, especially in a meta where you don't immediately have to pick Goldman first, and this team is just a lot more consistent. ACT is probably a very solid team, and I don't see them not making it the top 3 in this bracket, so I will be putting them at first place. The second place team I would be putting is Fennel, and Fennel is a pretty solid team as well. Their survivors are a bit more inconsistent, but that's trade-off with a hunter squad that is absolutely hard to deal with. The thing is that Fennel's hunters are genuinely insane, and their survivors have shown potential, but it just feels like this COA, they were kind of missing a lot. That's the reason I'm putting Fennel at second. It's not because this team can't be first, but because this team, the way they performed in qualifiers, almost feels like they could go all the way from second to third. And I just feel like Fennel, they're a bit inconsistent right now. And third place is going to be ZQ. Now, ZQ is even more interesting. Similarly to ACT, they beat Weibo Gaming 2-0 to qualify in the losers bracket. And they made an insane lower bracket run after getting eliminated or after getting sent by GG to the lowers in the first place. And it really tells a tale that ZQ has the potential to be a really good team. The problem is this kind of requires everyone to play at their peak performance. And it feels like that's a very inconsistent thing to rely on. ZQ is a good team, don't get me wrong. I think it's just really hard to rely on a hunter that has been long past his prime and a survivor squad that sometimes messes up the easiest games in history to really place any higher than third in a group that has more consistent teams. In fourth place, I'm going to be putting Pararon. One of the most surprising things that I saw this COA is the fact that many teams were putting Pararon at fifth, and I just feel like it's disingenuous. This team managed to beat PQQ, which was the favorite to qualify, and this team genuinely is really, really good. I do think that they have one of the best Korean rosters we have seen in a while, and I think that's also paired with the fact that because AG or Asian Games is a lot closer, there's a lot more pressure on the Korean players to perform at a high level. Pararon is a solid team, especially since I feel like they're facing Omni, which I will get into a bit. It just feels like PRR is not going to be losing and going to be winning a match this COA, which does lead me to Omni. Omni is dysfunctional. They now have one of their hunters playing survivors. It is a team that is a shell of itself following the qualifiers. And honestly, there's just no way this team is placing any higher than I have put it, which is fifth. This team is dysfunctional. I just don't see it. It requires their survivors to somehow find ways to tie, despite having one of their hunters now play survivor. I just don't get it. I don't really get why Omni is going to place higher. And it's one of my biggest questions as to why a lot of predictions put them at fourth over Pararon. Because this team, their roster is dysfunctional. And it's just completely different from what we saw in qualifiers. Even if you remove all the controversies, even remove all of that, if this is the roster that they were sending in for the global stage, Omni isn't gonna win anything. It just feels disingenuous to say that Omni will win against Pararon and rather disrespectful to Pararon as a whole. Hence, I will be putting Omni at fifth place. Now, my predictions will be as follows. I did put Fennel at first, and the reason why is because despite the inconsistencies, Fennel can be a top-level team that can make top 4. I truly believe this, and this is because Fennel survivors are genuinely good if they can actually lock in, and their hunters are MVP level. Their system, as I call it, is a really, really good system. They have a lot of good plans. They have a lot of good ideas. It really comes into the execution part of their survivors. And I feel like Fennel is a team that can be a contender this Call of the Abyss. It just requires a lot of locking in from their survivors because their hunters right now are playing at a peak. The second place is ZQ, and it's very similar to Fennel. This team can be a contending roster. The difference is that I think Fennel is much more consistent than ZQ, even though they're both kind of inconsistent. Because for Fennel, the issue is only on the survivors, but for ZQ, it's kind of on both. You have to rely on a survivor roster that sometimes plays a bit too aggressively and gives too much opportunities for the hunter, and then you have to rely on a hunter who was once, at some point, the greatest hunter of all time, but is too unk to the point that he got for Escape by GG Survivors. That's just a lot more inconsistent than Fennel at the moment, and I feel like I'd rather hedge my bet on Fennel being the contending team rather than ZQ. So I will be putting ZQ at second place. Now ACT will be at third place because at its peak, I think ACT is significantly worse than Fennel and ZQ if Fennel and ZQ play at their peak performance. They are the most consistent team, that's why realistically they should be first, but at the same time, they're that one team where if everyone played at the best that they could, I just feel like they would be the third place team in Group C. I just don't see how they would beat an MVP level Fennel or an MVP level ZQ. But ACT is a pretty solid team, so I don't see them losing to Peroron or Omni, and really not even close between those two teams. And of course, Peroron will be at 4th and Omni will be at 5th. Finally, it's time to talk about Group D. And Group D is everyone's favorite bracket because guess what? B4U is there. The first team that I will be putting at first place is Zeta Division. And really, it's more important to just talk about the first and second place, which is Zeta and then MRC. This is just a coin toss at this point. It's really hard to make an argument for why one team is better than the other. The main thing I can tell you is because Zeta won the championship last year, but this rarely even matters in this discussion. These two teams are just really, really, really good. But the main thing that I would say is that Zeta is a much more flexible survivor roster, and Zeta also has the advantage of having two hunters. They're a much more flexible team, and it makes it significantly harder for teams to prepare against. And I feel like Zeta, they're a good team. But yeah, Zeta MRC are just two big coin flips that almost feels like you can go on an unlimited rant about which team is better. So I won't really get deep into that. B4U is the third place team, and I know a lot of people think B4U can beat MRC in Zeta. This just isn't gonna happen. I think Zeta and MRC are a lot better equipped and better prepared to really deal with B4U, and I think bigger questions really have to come in the concerns of its survivors. We have mentioned it so many times, it's always the focal point of B4U's gameplay, but the survivors are always going to be a question mark regardless of how well they perform. B4U survivors have historically not been that good. But then again, B4U probably has the best survivors they've had in quite some time. It does feel as if B4U survivors are going to be pretty solid enough to the point that they should be able to comfortably place third place. Now, we are going to go into LX, and LX has the #1 Asia Hunter during the COA season, and that is Kurai. This is the main focal point of LX as a team, and especially with RT's roster changes, LX pretty comfortably sits at 4th, and at 5th is going to be none other than RT, who, well, due to some internal issues, had one of their hunters play survivor. I think that tells you that the situation at RT is quite dire and does feel as if it's almost unlikely for this team to actually win. So I will be putting them at 5th. Now for my predictions, I did make one very bold claim, and that's actually LX winning over B4U.
Hello guys, this is S'mores post edit. Yes, I am speaking in post edit. Now there was a section dedicated to my own Group D predictions, and initially it was supposed to be that Alex is 3rd and B4U is 4th, but after a lot, and I mean this a lot of thinking, a lot of reviewing the matches, I will still be putting B4U at LX, which means that it's basically just the same as my general predictions for this bracket. The reason why I initially thought Alex could win is because Kurai has shown to be a top level hunter. He's shown to be really, 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 really good in this tournament, and I think he has a lot of similarities to Sprinter that may allow Alex to prep. But then I kind of saw the team compositions Alex was running, and they were just very unoptimized. The survivors were also just not that good. I just don't think this team will really beat Sprinter unless that changes, but because they were running very wacky and very concerningly bad team comps during the duration of the entire tournament, I'm not sure whether any of that will be changing very soon. So I did decide to keep my general predictions. I'm not going to do anything crazy in Group D, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
But anyways, that is all for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.